so far I'm good.
So what were the major points? Like I knew like you raised some concrete issues. Like could you describe a little bit about what were the major issues you thought? Starting with the Markov's blanket.
Yeah, I think that our focus there were basically the notion of Markov blanket and the generative model. And the paper was actually called the Markov blanket trick on the aims of scope and the free energy principle. So our point was not that much whether the free energy principle is right or wrong. Actually, we presented the derivation there, and then we assumed that it was right. Whether it is mathematically right or wrong, I know my math, but I don't know that much as to that kind of assessment. So we say, okay, let's grant that this derivation is right. Given that, what are the issues we see? And our issues were like, they were claiming to model everything, but then they agreed, for instance, that they couldn't model things like candle flames. And this is a thing that they accept in a few papers, because candle flame happens to the boundary of the what would be the Markov blanket is so instantaneous that it's not more stable than the internal states. And one thing they need to be able to model using the free energy principle is that the blanket states are more stable than the internal ones, right?
But that comes to ecological psychology, right?
Yeah. So
the boundary between the organism and the environment,
and the boundaries of groups, right?
Yeah.
So then that's why I've talked about the title, because we were interested there in the scope. Okay, you say you model everything, but you don't. I mean, you should be more clear about what you are able to model and what you are able to not. To other things, it is that in their derivation, they start with the typical Langevin equation: x dot equal fx plus noise. And then they say you have these
it's plus noise. Whatever we cannot explain becomes a noise in an additive manner, right? Which is very counter to the resonance idea or the idea of multiplicativity and noise being informative.
Yeah. So they start there saying, and then you can this kind of phase space if you have this, right? And then if you put a Markov blanket there, those whole dynamics are partitioned in external dynamics, internal, and the blanket states. And our point there was, yes, that's good in the abstract. I mean, I do understand what you talk here, but let's try to do that in a typical dynamical systems. The HKB, phi dot equals to, which is kind of that, right? With the deterministic part and that. What you partition there, right? Is that phi dot already internal states? And if it is internal states, what are the external states? Right? Because phi dot is relative phase. What is the external state of relative phase? And if it's not the internal state, if it is the whole system before the partition, when you partition it, what are you partitioning?
So you're making an arbitrary boundary.
Exactly. So one claim they have is, it seems in the literature that the Markov blanket is an unproblematic notion, and that allows you to separate internal states and external states in a principled way. And we think it's not. Actually, when you go to any concrete systems, you still can use the Markov blanket to make this partition, and then you can apply the Bayesian inference. But what makes you to put the blanket here, there, or there, it's not doesn't follow from the free energy principle. It comes from other assumptions that you have. So your theory is not at least.
Well, that's the thing with a lot of things about free energy principle. A lot of thing is constrained out of those equations and out of those parameters rather than the principle bringing in those.
Yeah. So this is another thing that we were saying, like it's clear that every time you try to start with the algorithm and the first step is to apply the Markov blanket, you are bringing with you many other assumptions that doesn't depend on the free energy principle, but actually that shape the activity of the principle. That's why we have another paper that we might write someday. That we kind of claim that you have psychological assumptions that are more fundamental than the free energy principle for the free energy principle to work.
Right.
And Aldis, where do you put that thing?
Yeah.
Well, if you are a cognitivist, you might put it in the retina, or but that kind of thing. And then also another issue we saw is that there are sometimes some kinds of relations or some kinds of properties or states that doesn't be effectively captured by this internal external thing.
Yeah.
One thing is our relations. There are some relations that cut across this kind of thing. One of them likely affordances, right? But that to be taller than other person is not internal or
right. And even physiology. I mean, like sweating. You're sweating because of the heat, right? Now, where do you draw the boundary between the heat versus the internal state of sweating?
Yeah. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there are some things in some living systems. There are some theories that say that the internal states not only have a boundary, the typical enactivism autopoiesis is that you have your internal milieu and the boundary that would be the Markov blanket. But importantly, for those living systems, it's not that they have a boundary, but that they create it. And this relationship of constitution, it also escapes from the typical description of
like when I have my blanket, which is made by Markov and Sons, I create a boundary between me and my surroundings, right?
Yeah.
Pun intended.
And then kind of relationships. And then we in the last section, we think that there are some issues with the idea of the generative model.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, they wanted to be something the researcher writes down as a researcher, right? Which is good, right? You put there all how you see the world relates to things. Okay. But on the other hand, sometimes they talk as if the organism or the organism studied itself kind of embodied implicitly the generative model. And then it's not very clear how it can be. And actually, if you accept this second reading, the reading that somehow the organism facing its environment makes this Bayesian inference under an implicit generative model, that actually generative model is basically the joint probability of all the relevant relationships between all the states, external.
It's a lot of computation,
right? And it's, if you accept the view that that somehow the organism embodies or instantiates this generative model, you are at the beginning again. You have some knowledge in that generative model,
right?
that you are not able to explain when it comes.
And you are probably the most computationally expensive, because it seems that the idea of free energy principle, with these generative modeling will entail much more computational load than typical information theoretical metaphors ask for.
I think it is possible. To be fair, I think that most of the proponents are trying to avoid this second reading, and they try to go more as they move from this is a general theory of everything to this is a methodological tool. Their view of the generative model moves more from this is something embodied by whatever system we are interested in, but this is something the researcher uses to model the system.
So it is to be most generous. Would you say that it's completely non-ecological from the start, at the very least?
I think that if you take it to be in the substantive way, like the organisms are actually doing this, whatever, it's non-ecological.
Right.
If you take it to be a methodological tool, well, it's a methodological tool like dynamical systems theories. But in that case, I'm not still convinced that I should use it over dynamical systems or over.
So either way,